I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. On the Senate floor Thursday, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto voiced her support for the Freedom to Travel for Healthcare Act of 2022. She, along with other Democratic senators, introduced the legislation that would protect the right of those traveling across state lines for abortion access. The Nevada Democrat decried states that are passing anti-choice legislation to criminalize women and doctors. Here's more from Senator Cortez Masto.
Mr. President, I rise today along with my colleagues, and I want to thank my colleague, Senators Murray, Whitehouse, and Gillibrand for their good work with me on the legislation we are talking about today, which is the Freedom to Travel for Health Care Act. As you've heard from my colleagues, and as we know in the past few months, we have seen women's right to choose taken away in states around the country overnight. Less than 3 weeks ago, the Supreme Court explicitly overturned Roe versus Wade, depriving women of a right they held for 50 years. When the court decided Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, it repeatedly insisted that its holding would, quote, return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives in the states. Forget women, forget women's rights, but let's give it to the elected. Let's give it to the politicians. As a result, in 18 states, abortion is either effectively banned or will be within 30 days. Ultimately, around half of states are expected to get rid of most or all abortion services within their borders. In the face of these profound restrictions on reproductive health services, American women who are able to do so have had to travel to states like mine that still protect the woman's right to choose. Thanks to a 1990 referendum, Nevada has enshrined the right to choose in statute in my state. That's why we're already seeing women make their way to Nevada to get the health care that they need and they deserve. But radical anti-choice policymakers have been emboldened by this Supreme Court decision, and it's this court, and its shocking disregard for precedent. Yet they're not satisfied with a country where abortion is only banned in half the states. We know now they are working to introduce legislation in Congress to ban abortion nationwide. And until they can pass it, they want to stop women from traveling for critical care and to punish people who support these women. Anti-choice state legislators in Missouri, in Texas, and Arkansas have said they want to pass bills to fine or prosecute women who travel for health care, do the same to providers who offer abortion services, and the many employers who have said they will support their employees who need to seek reproductive care in another state. Let me be specific about this, because this is devastating already to so many, including in my state. In Missouri, a state legislator has repeatedly introduced legislation that would allow private citizens to sue those who help Missouri citizens receive out-of-state abortion services. In Texas, state legislators have said they will introduce legislation to ban businesses that help employees travel to receive abortions. They've also written cease and desist letters to companies like Lyft, Citigroup, and even law firms to tell them to stop helping employees who seek abortion out of state. And in Arkansas, a state senator has called for a law targeting businesses helping employees travel for care. And let's not forget South Dakota, because the governor of South Dakota refused in an interview to rule out laws that target women who travel for abortion. But we're not done yet, because we also know that some anti-choice groups are actively pushing for such bans. The Thomas More Society, an extremist anti-choice group, is working on draft legislation. Its vice president told the Washington Post, quote, "Just because you jump across a state line doesn't mean your home state doesn't have jurisdiction. It's not a free abortion card when you drive across the state line." The National Association of Christian Lawmakers, an anti-abortion organization led by Republican state legislators, is also reported to be working on similar legislation modeled after the Texas law. There's no doubt in my mind that some states are going to continue to move forward with these kinds of legislation. And I want to note that, quite frankly, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have tried to have it both ways for years, insisting that the right to choose was safe. In my state, they've done it. At the same time, they supported increasingly extreme limits to it. We even heard nominees testify that they would follow Supreme Court precedent, including Roe and Casey. And yet now we all know those reassurances were all false. We've seen women's reproductive rights eroded steadily for decades, and we know that anti-choice activists won't stop. This is a form of gaslighting, to keep insisting that American women will be able to get care when we know that anti-choice legislators and groups are working to stop them from doing so. What legislators are doing across the country to restrict women from traveling is just blatantly unconstitutional. They constrain the fundamental constitutional right to travel. They are anti-woman, they're anti-business, and they're anti-provider. And let me just say, merely proposing this legislation, merely talking about civil action or prosecuting a woman or a provider or even an employer that helps a woman to travel is having a chilling effect. In my state, we are already seeing that these proposals are having a chilling effect on my providers who are worried about offering quality abortion care in the face of potential lawsuits. And in Montana, reproductive health clinics are even limiting care to in-state residents only. Imagine traveling hundreds of miles for essential health care only to be turned away for fear of a lawsuit. That's why I and my colleagues have introduced this bill to make it crystal clear. States cannot and must not prosecute women who travel across state lines for critical reproductive care. Our legislation also protects healthcare providers in destination states and anyone who helps women travel for the care they deserve, from businesses to taxi drivers to doctors. Today, we're calling to pass this legislation. If my colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe in states' rights and the liberty of freedom of women in this country, they should support this bill. If they believe in the fundamental right of all Americans to travel, they should support this bill. And if they fail to protect women who travel for health care and those who support them, then they need to go on record for the American people to explain why. And I'll tell you what, Mr. President, it is not enough to stand there and say that somehow this legislation is a fly-in abortionist legislation. My colleague from Montana failed to read this legislation. And fear-mongering at this point in time, when women's rights, fundamental rights, are being eroded in this country, is not the answer that women and so many Americans in this country now need. What we need is for people to recommend and support and identify with the freedoms that this country brings to all of us, whether you're a woman or a man in this country. This is about the right to choose and make those decisions for women. It's a fundamental right. It's an important right for our health care and our decisions. We are 50% of this population, and we deserve to be treated equally. With that, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 4504, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
reserving the right to object.